Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the catalog trial and Ridgetop tour live Q&A with Rochelle and Cody. Hopefully you've all had a chance to watch their video on seedsavers.org/conference. It is a great video. It's one of my favorites. If you haven't already seen it already, I highly recommend it. I really love how their personalities come out as they're sharing their knowledge and showing all the great work they've been doing this year. And thank you both to Cody and Rochelle for taking the time this afternoon to answer some questions and talk a little bit more about the work that they're doing. And we are ready to go. I'm going to hand it over to Cody and Rochelle.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this Q&A. Rochelle and I would like to take a minute or two to just introduce ourselves again and give a quick, brief synopsis of the roles we both have here at Seed Savers Exchange. So again, my name is Cody Egan, and I am the catalog field coordinator. So I manage the catalog productions, the seed productions that we grow on site that we sell in the catalog. Like you would have seen in the video, it's larger scale. So I think I mentioned the alpaca tomato we're growing. That's a population of 800 tomato plants, lots of fruit. So we're thinking large scale for catalog sales. So any large scale seed questions or things related to kind of broader, bigger infrastructure questions, I'm happy to answer. And I'll turn it over to my dear friend, Rochelle.
Yeah, just echo again, thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be able to interact directly with you. Normally when we have an in-person conference, one of our favorite things is to just talk with people and answer questions and yeah, get to share more about what we do here on like a really practical micro level. Like I said in the video, I am the collections field coordinator. So I'm we're kind of like two sides of the coin. I am managing all of our grow outs that are regenerations for our collection seed bank. So in our collection, we have 20 to 30,000 accessions, and all of those seeds have, you know, a lot of them have been sitting in storage for many years, and maybe before we got them, they were sitting in someone else's storage. And so our job in our regenerations here on Heritage Farm is to refresh those seeds so that we can get new, healthy, really vibrant seeds in our seed bank and have a quantity that is large enough that we can distribute through our yearbook and exchange. So yeah, it's really exciting to work with the collection varieties, and conversely to what Cody said about his scale, for collection grow outs, each year we're growing multiple hundreds of varieties, which is crazy to think about for a lot of people. But each of those varieties we're growing in a much smaller scale. So less than 50 plants per variety, but many, many varieties each year. So that's a little bit more explanation of our roles here. And now I will ask Janine if there are any questions at this point.
Yeah, so go ahead and raise your hands and type in the questions at any point, and I'll kind of get to you as we're going. The first question here is from Tracy. Tracy is saying they like the video and really like how you use tomatoes and runner beans to create a visual fence to deter deer. They're wondering, however, how you keep deer and other critters from eating that visual fence.
Yeah, so this feels like it's a little bit addressed at the catalog field. So we do use those visuals, but that's not the only deterrent we use. So aside from the panels that are growing a lima bean or a tomato or a runner bean, we also have one ribbon of electrified deer shocking fence. I don't know what.
Yeah. Electric fence.
Exactly. So we have that about 3 feet away from the panels on the outside. So we're creating a double barrier, one of which is visual, the other is electrified. And deer are very deterred by sort of 3-dimensional scaling. So when you have one layer of visual deterrent, another one that's kind of floating up in the air, and then we usually do an unelectrified line up top. You get a lot of that kind of combines together to be very scary to deer. You know, we kind of personify them in that way, but it creates a little bit of uncertainty for them. If they're thinking of jumping over that fence, they're gonna look up, see our other line, and be like, whoa, there's something there. Maybe I don't want to jump in here. We always do have a little bit of kind of quote unquote sacrificial nibbling that happens. Usually that's in the spring when we have, you know, like little fawns running around and they can go right underneath that electrified line, but it's really on the margins. And usually the plants grow out of that really quickly. So not a big concern for us. And by that point, it's usually only foliage, not a lot of actual seed or flowers. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, we've had really great success having just that line, one line of electric just outside of the living barrier, kind of 3 feet off the ground. So it's at this height where the adults aren't going to just be able to stand there chomping on the living barrier. Yeah, it's worked really well.
Yeah. And to continue what we said in the video, again, knock on wood, we have not had any deer in any of our gardens this year, which is always a really nice statistic to share.
Great, thank you. Rochelle and Cody, I know one of the things that shows up in your video, but that we didn't actually take the time to talk about in the video is some of the other kind of pest deterrents. I think towards the end of the video, there's like this giant balloon looking thing with almost like a target or eyeball on it. Are there other kind of, you know, fancy pest deterrent applications that you can talk about as well?
Yeah, deterring pests is one example of, we always like to say, like, you know, we are just farmers that are trying to learn and improve each year. And just like every other farmer, we are playing around with new methods and sometimes fail and sometimes have successes. And dealing with bird pests is something that I don't feel like I've come to like great success yet. We have a lot of crow pressure, we have pheasants, we have like little sparrows, we have all kinds of bird pressure on a lot of our crops throughout the year. So yeah, Janine mentioned these big balloons that have circles that are supposed to look like owl eyes. And that's something that is supposed to deter crows, but crows are really smart. And so we have a lot of things that we're trying to keep crows away with, lots of different methods that are supposed to represent those owl eyes, and lots of bird scare flash tape. It's like a 1.5 inches wide, and it's like really shiny silver and shiny red. And you can put streamers of like 1 foot or 2 long. You want it to be long so that it really flaps in the wind. And just that flashiness makes most birds question if they want to go over there and eat the thing that's right there. And then we also, this is a new technique that we were trying this year, and kind of grim, but because crows are really smart, one of the things that we researched and found is that you can buy fake dead crows. So it's like this plastic thing that looks like a crow, and the ones that we have like black feathers on them, and you hang them in the field where you are seeing crow damage. So it's really gruesome, and it's kind of weird to say, but we're trying that out this year because last year we just had tons of crow damage on tomatoes and corn, and some of our melons too. So far I haven't seen too much bird damage, but it's always a battle.
And I, as fellow gardeners and farmers, just want to share a fun story that we've been dealing with. Pheasants, everyone thinks of them kind of dopey, silly birds that just run around. They've become a real problem in one of our fields, one of our catalog production fields. And for those of you who aren't in the Midwest, our area of kind of northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, I believe just officially entered into like a low stage drought. So we've actually been seeing an increase in pest damage just from little critters, including pheasants and mice, trying to find some water. So it's kind of one of those unique situations where nature and farming are colliding, and we're trying to figure out how to work with nature, because obviously we're all trying to steward the land. Diversity is always really good in farming, including the pests. I mean, to some extent, you want birds. Pheasants are really good at picking out weed seeds. Turkeys are really good at picking out weed seeds. So we don't want to just, get rid of them all. We want to work with them. And the one thing I'll add that we've been working on in the catalog fields, because they're bigger spaces to cover, is trying to disrupt the landing zone of these bigger birds. So creating kind of a hatchwork of streamers and ribbons about 6 feet up. I can just barely walk underneath it, so that there's not a clear zone for birds to come in and land, has been fairly effective. But again, like Rochelle said, every year, we're kind of dealing with different pests and different rodent issues. So we kind of are always playing with what's out there and what we can do to grow our seeds to true maturity and not have to like preemptively do a harvest or anything. So.
Yeah, thanks. So it looks like we have a couple more people just with basically one more question about deterring pests, specifically raccoons. Can you address that? And I think in the video you specifically talk about because you're growing corn, you need to deter raccoons. So can you explain that a little bit better and also talk about how you do that? Thanks.
Yeah, so raccoons really love corn. And corn doesn't like to be eaten by raccoons.
Maybe don't like it.
Yeah, so we use this like 2-foot tall mesh electrified raccoon fencing, and it's worked sort of well. So the way that we set it up is we lay a strip of landscape fabric that's like 3 feet wide underneath the raccoon fence. So that just keeps all of the plants and grasses and stuff that are underneath the fence from growing up into the fence. It reduces the amount of time we have to spend maintaining the fence so it doesn't get shorted out on those plants. And yeah, we just set that up all the way around our collection fields that have corn inside them. And for our catalog corns, we put it just around the whole block of corn. And that works fairly well if the fence is in good condition. We, at this point, our raccoon fencing is fairly old, and we've noticed that it doesn't have a strong voltage as it used to, because there are lots of little broken pieces in that wire. So if you're buying new raccoon fence, like, it'll probably work really well. But raccoons, once they know that there's like a corn that's right at that milky stage, they will figure out how to get in there and probably just barrel through whatever short little fences in their way, because they know that there's something good inside. So the key is to set that up before your corn is at the milky stage. And when it's just first starting to develop those ears, that's a good time to throw the fence up so that the raccoons never find out what's inside.
And so we also do corn grow outs for the catalog, which are closer to like an acre of corn. And unfortunately, raccoon fencing is fairly expensive. And by fairly, I mean pretty expensive, like very cost prohibitive. So when we can, we like to use that electrified barrier, but we've had a lot of success using black snow fence. So it's like 1 by 1 inch squares. It's, I think, 9 feet tall, yeah. 8 to 9 feet tall. And we sort of use the corn and then a couple of tall fiberglass poles to just wrap the corn with that snow fence. And then we use the black landscape fabric Rochelle was talking about And we actually use ground staples and staple it so that they're overlapping. So there's no way to burrow under, and the fence itself is wobbly enough that when a raccoon starts to climb up it, it just kind of like falls backwards and it flops over, and it's like using our fence to deter them. And we've had pretty good success with that. Every once in a while, they'll find a hole at the bottom and kind of gnaw their way in. But again, we like to get it up, like really as soon as we start silking, we're like, all right, raccoons are gonna be coming, we gotta get ahead of this. So we'll put it up before they even realize there's a tasty treat in there, because it's much easier to just not have them in than to try to stop them getting in, like Rochelle said earlier. Yeah. So raccoons are definitely one pest that we take seriously, because in the course of one night, they can wipe out, I mean, it's like an amazing amount of corn they eat. And you're just like, how many raccoons were out here? Is this like a little party they had? But yeah, can just take down a whole bunch of corn in just a couple of hours. So we really try to get ahead of that.
Yeah, thank you. Next question we have is, what have you found to be the best methods to suppress weed pressure in your organic fields?
Oh my. So again, like Rochelle said, we're always experimenting. You know, we are learning just like everyone else in this grand experiment that is farming. And as people have done more research and no-till options or reduced tillage, we're really trying to incorporate that into our systems and our models. So one I mentioned in the video is to sow sort of like an understory cover crop, specifically in between plastic beds. We've been using annual ryegrass. It's a really quick early season grass that grows really lush and really densely, and germinates before most of those aggressive, noxious summer annuals. So we get that down as soon as we lay the plastic, it fills in, it becomes this like beautiful green lawn for about a month. And once it's like cap high, we go and we mow that down. And we've had really good luck with just suppressing weeds that also, covers the soil. So it's respecting the soil a little bit and also doesn't keep continuously pulling up the new flush of weed seeds that are in the soil profile. So I think to speak kind of broadly for our field ops team in general, we've been really looking at ways to reduce our tillage, to just get that first flush of weeds, and we'll deal with the rest that come on, but trying to decrease tillage to increase soil health has been a mantra we've really been trying to live here at Seed Savers. Trying to think of other examples.
Yeah, I guess another big example, which is potentially less applicable to people who have small home gardens. But if you have enough space to do cover cropping, that's something that we put a lot of energy and a lot of focus into. So we rotate each of our fields. Each of our fields that we're producing in are we only produce in 1 year, and then it has 2 years off. And in those years of rest, we make sure that it's covered with a nice cover crop and not just let to grow whatever weed seeds are in the soil there. And so I think of cover cropping as not only taking care of the soil and putting more organic matter into the soil, but also really dealing with our weed seed problems and really trying to kick that in the years that those fields are fallow. So every year that a whole bunch of weeds don't go to seed is a success. So in the year that we are producing in a field, inevitably there's a bunch of plants that will go to seed and throw all of those annual weed seeds around. But if we can get very few of them to germinate and go to seed the next year and the year after that, that's really paying it forward to ourselves in the future to just really reduce that seed bank.
I would also just suggest on a small scale for home gardeners, Rochelle and I both talked about this black landscape fabric. So it's a woven plastic. I know we all had issues with plastic, but it's really, really resilient. Can use it for multiple years. We actually are just sorting through some that are from 2010 that we're still using. So it's a nice way to cover your soil, because again, bare soil is always going to lead to weeds germinating. You know, that's why they're weeds. They're really good at opportunistic growth. So covering the area that you don't want to grow in, or conversely covering the area you do want to grow in, and either cutting or burning holes into that landscape fabric can really help. We also like to use that kind of dual purpose, because we're northern Iowa, so we're pretty far up north. Our growing season is super hot and heavy. You know, we have just a handful of months before our first frost or our last frost. So it helps to warm up the soil earlier in the spring. So for us, that's a real benefit. We can get our hot weather crops in a little bit earlier, especially things like tomatoes and peppers that are going to be there the whole growing season. So if you have a bad weed situation, it's going to be there the whole year. So really thinking about like those duplicity, those things that have like a double bonus. I love that when you can kind of like stack, you know, efficiencies. So if you're smothering out weeds or not letting them germinate, plus you're heating up the soil so your crops are a little bit happier earlier, you know, just like a beautiful synergy of things coming together.
Right. Yeah, and then we also use a lot of mulch. And that mulch comes from our farm. We have somebody that comes and mows and rakes and bales, and we have a big bale chopper. And yeah, we spread a lot of mulch, and the mulch is sometimes a frustration because it does bring in weed seeds. But when we put down a thick layer, usually those weed seeds don't germinate until later in the season, and we can take care of them and be done with them. Oops, sorry about that. Yeah, so we use a lot of mulch so that we can start harvesting instead of weeding in the middle of August, because harvesting starts to take up a lot of time.
And I just want to say one more thing about the mulch. You know, when I talk about double stacking, so we're moving essentially, you know, grass, alfalfa mulch to our fields, but we're reincorporating that in the fall. So we're adding to that organic matter. We're trying to not just take from the soil, but we're also thinking about our systems that get back to the soil. So it's a really nice system because we are, you know, adding organic matter, which for us at Seed Savers is usually the main amendment, sort of soil health beyond reducing our tillage that we're trying to work on, is always adding organic matter. That's always going to help with crop fertility and with just plant vigor. So it's a nice system. It's a little laborious, and it always ends up happening in like early July when it's like 90 degrees and humid here, and so you just get covered with mulch, and we just, you know, it's one of those where you pay it forward to your future selves. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, guys. Melissa Moore has a fun question for you. Melissa wants to know what you've been most excited about this year and what you're most looking forward to next year.
Ooh. I feel like I should have an answer for this. So it's actually something that Stefan Mirsky, our evaluations manager, highlighted in his eval garden tour. It's this safflower called the Lorenzo Trussoni family heirloom safflower. And we grew it the first year I was here in 2018, and it was fine. It wasn't a great production. And I kind of got lost in the shuffle of last year, 2019, and then this year, I was just like, all right, we're going all or nothing on this. And we planted like 600 plants, which for this safflower, if you've seen a safflower grow before, they're shorter, but they just branch really beautifully, get really big. And like Stefan pointed out, the like little threads, the petals are just beautiful. So they grew really well, they looked really beautiful, and earlier this summer, there's just this sea of orangey red floating above the soil, and it was just this super beautiful stretch of field. And we just finished our last harvest yesterday of that, so it's drying in our seed drying tunnel, and I'm very excited to thresh it. So I think that kind of, for me, has been a real joy to work with. They're also really prickly, and it's really fun to just work with plants that like are a little defensive, because you're just like, you're doing your thing, I like you. Like, And just like reading about safflower research, and I'm just like, can we incorporate safflowers into field protection from like bunnies or something? So there's like all this old lore about safflowers as a perimeter, and I'm not really into it, but I like the idea of it.
Yeah, so when working with the collection, it's like lots of new varieties every year that I've never worked with. And so instead of having like one variety that I get to see every year and get to see how it's doing this year, I just really get excited about crop types. And so recently I've just been really excited about cowpeas. They're just starting to, some of the varieties are just starting to dry down and get ready for harvest. One thing that I really love about cowpeas is that they're so variable, and you just, in terms of their growth habit and their length of season that they need, you just never know. And since we have a really short season here, cowpeas are often a crop type that are difficult for us to have a long enough season for them to set flowers and pods and dry down and get a good harvest seed. So it's really exciting to me when it's like right now, the middle of August, and there are some varieties that are like ready to harvest, and there's other varieties that haven't flowered yet. And you're just like, okay, well, probably not going to get any seed from you. I'm sorry that our season is so short, but it's really exciting when their pods. I just love because their stalks are just like this, and their pods are just like they just sit up above the foliage, and they're just a real pleasure to harvest.
I just love this. Once I get started talking about plants, it's really hard to stop. But I'm just going to highlight one more because I think it's also a really cool example of how we keep talking about like Seed Savers trying to innovate and keep up with sort of modern small-scale organic agriculture. And like Rochelle said, our growing season, I said this too, is condensed. And usually our falls get really wet. They get humid, and dry seeded crops in general are just like, are you gonna finish? I hope so. So this year we purchased a couple of caterpillar tunnels, which are semi-permanent but movable structures, covered spaces. So I think the ones we got are like 12 feet tall at the very highest point. And I talked with our field production manager, our seed production manager, Cody, and I was like, Cody, I want to grow a basil and a lettuce, and I want to have an inside population and an outside population. So we have this basil, Italia from Grandma, which is this beautiful, super, just like the most perfumey basil you can imagine, with 700 plants, which is a heck of a lot of basil inside the tunnel, and then 700 plants outside the tunnel. So this fall, as they start drying down, as the seeds start maturing, we're going to keep those two populations separate so that we can see, like, if we invest in more of these covered growing spaces, like, can we grow better quality dry seeded crops like basil? And it is just a treat to go over there because basil is such a long season bloomer that the honeybee, I mean, it's been blooming for like 6 weeks or something. Still going strong, and the honeybees are just, I mean, you can't walk through without like brushing them away. It's just one of my favorite places to wander through. And again, it's like a really fun experiment for us to see, like, in Northeast Iowa, how do we grow these really, really ephemeral, hard to get dry seeded crops like basil. So it's a fun experiment. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. We have time for a few more questions here. So I'm going to ask a question from Kimberly. Kimberly is wondering, if you could speak a little bit more about how you receive seeds in the collection and the inventory process, if they're donated from all over the country.
Yeah, well, my short answer is not really, because that's not my position. Somebody can. So yeah, we have a whole group of people who work in preservation department. And if you haven't watched the preservation lab tour, you should check that out. I haven't watched that video myself yet, but Shelja and Kita and Sarah are all people, and Nora, they are all involved in that process, in the donation and accepting and the inventory process, the details of which I don't even know most of those details. So I won't pretend to answer that question, but hopefully in future conference years, you can come in person and talk to those people.
Great, thank you. A somewhat related question, but more related to what you're doing, is what criteria do you use to add varieties to the catalog? And conversely, do you take things out of the catalog, and why?
Yeah, so we are always trying to get things from our collection into our catalog. As part of our mission, we want to make sure that these really amazing heirloom, open pollinated varieties are accessible to everyone. And the catalog has such a wide distribution, it really helps to further that. We, in the last few years, have really solidified a process here at Seed Savers, or have begun to solidify, I'll say. It's called the Collection to Catalog Pipeline, or Collection to Catalog Committee. So we work with, it's a multi-department committee of people who includes Rochelle and myself, and Kobe, our boss, from the field ops department. It also includes people from marketing, people from our seed house, the preservation department. So we really group together a whole slew of people, and we get recommendations from preservation, and through a kind of, we're assessing them based on, uniqueness, flavor, variety. And one of those is also like, does it fill a need in the catalog? Like, do we already have essentially the same variety or varietal, so we don't want to like overlap. So we are indeed always kind of maintaining that balance of things in the catalog, but introducing new things. And to be 100% honest, like a lot of that is just dictated by our pick line, which is where we keep all of the packets. I think 650 varieties are listed in the catalog. And there's really not much space to expand that. So we kind of try to keep that balance around 650. I haven't watched the Seed House tour. I don't know if John, our Seed House director, addresses that, but it's a delicate balance. But always really fun to see these new varieties and get to know them. And eventually, hopefully, I get to grow them to go into the catalog. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, just that as our mission, like some of the varieties that we take out of the catalog are varieties that are really pretty common in the marketplace. And so our goal is always to be bringing in to the marketplace varieties that are not very common, we can't really find other places, and make that more widely available to people. And so, yeah, if we have a tomato that's pretty rare and kind of similar to one that's really common, we might decide to take out that common one and put in one that's more rare that we're excited about. So just to increase the variety that's in the marketplace, we want to be increasing that rather than diminishing that the way that our seed world is going the last few decades.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So the last question for the day we'll say is this one. What types of extreme weather patterns have you been experiencing there in Northeast Iowa in the past 2 years? And how does that affect your seed production?
That is a great question. And I feel like, so just to name a couple: drought, too much water, severe swings in temperature. So, we'll go from 70 degrees to 90 degrees in the course of 2 days. Like, those are all triggering different responses in plants. We have really early frosts. We have really late frosts. I mean, we're kind of seeing the gambit of all of these different weather conditions here. And it makes it really challenging. It's hard to, so Rochelle and I both lead crews, and one moment last season was after this sort of straight line windstorm we had, and I think it happened on a Wednesday, And the next Thursday we came, or that Thursday we came in and our high tunnel had blown its plastic, our hardening off area had blown its plastic, and a huge number of the plants were just on the ground. And it's really hard to walk into those situations and try to, you know, maintain some positivity, some morale while our heart is breaking, because, you know, we're plant people, we're all plant people. We love what we're doing and we get so connected to these plants. So it's been challenging. We're trying to, you know, come up with some field methods that help to mitigate like late season rains, and trying to just listen to the earth a little bit and say like, okay, it's still raining, so we're not going to plant this week, but it's really difficult. And I could ramble about this for a while, but instead I'll turn it over to Rochelle to add some comments.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's such a great question because climate chaos is real and we're experiencing that. And also plants are resilient. So I just think of that story that Cody said after that big windstorm. It looked like a lot of those plants that were damaged were not going to make it. And also we had a lot of infrastructure damage that we knew the time that it was going to take us to fix that infrastructure was going to take us away from all of the plant maintaining that we needed to do at that time. And at the end of last season, we had a lot of harvests, you know, so like a lot of those plants made it through still and still flowered and still set seed. And we take encouragement from the resilience that we see out in our fields and out in the world. And then I also think about the caterpillar tunnels that Cody mentioned earlier with the basil. That was a response to our really wet spring last year, and knowing that we have wet falls usually. So we were thinking, yeah, how can we have some infrastructure that's maybe not as tall and big as the hoop houses and the high tunnels that we have that got damaged pretty easily in big storms. We thought maybe the caterpillar tunnels would be a little bit more like under the wind because they're shorter, but also protect more plants from too much water. And this year we don't have hardly any water. And so we didn't cover those for a long time. So they actually, one of them still we haven't put plastic on. And so it maybe gives us the flexibility to respond and kind of work with what is happening, because we are dealing with both sides of the extremes, and we can't get too invested in making systems that are good in too wet situations or systems that are good in drought situations. So I don't know, we haven't figured it out, and it's something that stresses us out when we think about how to plan for climate chaos, because it's chaotic.
Yeah. And I would just, you sparked an idea in me. When we talk about resilient plants, we also think about selecting out the best of those populations. They're going to innately have a little bit of selection for adversity when we save seed on those plants. And really, as we look towards the changing climate, really thinking about regional seed sources and like congruent growing methods. So we grow organically in the Midwest. Those seeds are conditioned for organic systems, which is not to, in the Midwest, which again is not to say that they're not going to perform really well in Florida or Alaska, but like really thinking about, you know, we talk about local food, but local seeds is also a really important topic that is really near and dear to my heart. But we love all the support for seed savers, and we try to grow like the best, highest quality seed we can to just perform really well in all environments and all climates. But it's a battle.
Yeah.
It's a battle we love.
That's great. Thank you so much. With that, I think we need to sign off. Thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate it, and thank you for spending your time with us, Cody and Rochelle. Any last thoughts before we sign off?
Thank you so much. Yeah, save your seats.
Save your seeds.
Great, thanks so much. We'll see you at the next one.